We are doing Extra Life again this year, where you can mash buttons, roll dice, play games, and help kids along the way. I hope you'll be a part of that with us. Stick around after the video for more information. Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Superman, Man of Tomorrow? Stick around and find out. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of the animated movie Superman, Man of Tomorrow. The synopsis on IMDb reads, "It's the dawn of a new age of heroes, and Metropolis has just met its first. But as Daily Planet intern Clark Kent, working alongside reporter Lois Lane, secretly wields his alien powers of flight, super strength, and X-ray vision in the battle for good, there's even greater trouble on the horizon." Alright, so let's talk about what this beast basically is. It's the Superman origin story, but with a sci-fi emphasis. It skips Krypton and focuses really on Superman's first appearance, deciding how he's going to go about, revealing himself to humanity, the origins of his costume and things like that, and the early days following his first appearance. Lobo and Martian Manhunter enter the scene at the same time, and so it's really focused on humanity seeing these aliens for the first time, dealing with the presence of aliens, and they're just kind of the xenophobia that would naturally come along with that. And Clark is figuring out what he should be doing with his abilities and how to start off on the right foot with humanity. He and Lois are both new to the Daily Planet. She has just become a reporter. Clark is still an intern. Clark's parents are alive, which I think is great, and they are loving sources of support and counsel for him. Lex Luthor also involved, not the chief antagonist, but a major player in the story, and he's trying to work the situation to his advantage. There's some nice focus on Clark's motivation. I think that that's really important to do when you're telling a story about Superman, because people typically think of him as boring and just kind of a goody two-shoes. But so you really always, in a Superman story, I think, to make him work well, you have to bring out his nature, his personality, his thoughts, his concerns, and the things that drive him. So I would say that in this movie they go deeper than the average animated superhero movie, getting into his motivations, but still not as deep as I would like. I feel like we've seen his origin story enough that if we're going to do it again, yes, the sci-fi emphasis is kind of nice, but Man of Steel really did that first. Even though that sci-fi focused a lot more on Krypton and things from Krypton, it still had that aspect where it was playing up the sci-fi aspect and kind of downplaying a bit the superhero stuff, which this movie also does, at least for the first half. I think it does start leaning into superhero stuff, costumes, and what you would expect a superhero animated movie to feel like in the second half. But the first half, it's really going for straight sci-fi in a lot of ways. And again, I feel like we've already seen that, and so I would like to lean into the motivations a little bit more. Granted, we've seen that also in Man of Steel, where we dig into Clark's motives and his inner feelings and turmoil and stuff like that. But for me, I'm always going to appreciate that more on repeat rather than just a concept being repeated. Let's see here. And the reason being that performances can make things different and fresh every time, whereas a concept is a concept, the execution can be a little bit different, but for me, it's not as big of a deal. Let's see here. So Superman, Martian Manhunter, Lobo, and Parasite are all in the mix throughout this movie, and so there's still a solid amount of action, despite them going a little bit into character stuff. Parasite is given a family background that makes him sympathetic, I think, yet still he behaves in one or two scenes like a chuckling villain. I mean, literally ha 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 ha. And I'm like, I don't understand why he would be behaving that way. His origin does not explain that side of his personality, and Rudy Jones himself, who becomes the Parasite, that doesn't seem to be a part of his personality. So anytime that he's shown that way, even though it's not all the time, I'm just like, that doesn't make sense to me. I prefer interpretations of the Parasite character where he is a tragic figure, he's desperately hungry. That's been one interpretation of the character. This one is more, I'm power mad, and I don't like that interpretation of the character. I don't think it's near as interesting, and especially when they're going for sympathy from the audience, and to see this as tragic the same way that Superman does. Superman has compassion for him. I think for us to feel that too, they could have leaned much more into the whole desperately hungry concept. Now, as I understand, this is based on a comic book story, and so maybe that wasn't part of the original comic book story. I've not read it, but either way, I think that at the end of the day, it's better to just tell a good story than to be beholden to the source material. I know there's certainly people that are going to feel a different way from me than that. And of course, what's a good story for someone else is going to be different for me. I realize that. The pre-climax. There's kind of a pre-climax and a climax. The pre-climax kind of halts the action for a moment and creates this scene that I think is going for this heartfelt moment of transparency for Superman. And it just fell flat for me. It seemed forced. It seemed unmotivated, or it didn't seem led to in the way that I felt like it could have been in the previous elements of the movie, the previous story elements of the movie. And it also felt unrealistic, the way the action halted. And I'm like, really? They're just going to stand there? So I'm trying not to give away details, but I'm just like, why is this happening? And then the actual climax just after that involves a use of Parasite's powers that produced a confusing result for me. And that's because I think we didn't get clear limitations defined for his powers, or how exactly they work, what he can absorb, what he can't absorb. It just felt like the ending finally happened because the writer wanted it to, not because it made sense given what I know as a viewer about the Parasite and how his powers work. As far as the cast goes, solid performances, I think, but nothing felt revelatory, like, oh my gosh, this is just a cool take on such and such character. Zachary Quinto stands out slightly to me as Lex Luthor. He brings some of that same vibe that he has as Spock, cold and intellectual, but more cold and maybe less snobby. But still, there's this feeling of this is an intellect that we're dealing with. And so it's definitely a different sound from Spock, but there's enough overlap that I think he is a really appropriate fit. And even if I didn't know it was him, I think it would be a solid interpretation of Lex Luthor. Darren Criss is a new name to me, and he plays Clark and Superman. And I thought that he did a nice job of going with what clearly seemed to be the intent of the script, to make Clark's insecurity not an act, but really where he is in this story, where he is at the start of this story. And so the insecure Clark feels like that's the real Clark to me, as he's figuring out what his place is as Clark Kent in the Daily Planet, and then also figuring out his place as Superman. But as he begins to get more clarity on the direction he wants to go regarding how to use his powers and take on this Superman persona, he becomes more confident as well. And so the Superman persona also seems like a natural outgrowth of the character and the character's story. So it's an interesting kind of way that they kind of balanced those two sides of who Kal-El is, and I found it to be satisfying. It makes me wonder, like, going long term, what does that mean? If because we do, I think, see a little bit less of Clark Kent as Clark Kent once he gets the full suit and he's acting as Superman. And so long term, I'd wonder, well, is Clark Kent going to be more confident, or is he going to realize there's value in appearing insecure and stuff like that, and so he'll kind of be putting on a persona a little bit? Or are we going to find that Superman is not always confident and secure, but that he actually is insecure and down to earth? And I felt like Superman in this movie was pretty down to earth, and I just don't know what they would do long term to really differentiate between those two. And this version of Clark Kent doesn't strike me as someone who would be really apt to put on an act, either as Clark Kent or as Superman. And so long term, I'm not sure what they would do with the character. I'd be curious to know. There is one instance in voice acting that I was not happy with, and that was when an adult woman was briefly used to voice a small child. This is a big pet peeve of mine. I know it's very common in animation, but I think that, you know, you do see plenty of animated movies and things where they do get a child actor in there. It makes a huge difference, and I feel like if we can do this in movies, then we ought to be able to do it in animated shows, especially when, you know, you can have the kid in there and you can can work them take after take. You don't have to factor in other actors' performances working at the same time. You can just get that kid in there, get their isolated performance, and when you get what you need, then you get them out, you know. And as someone who's worked with child actors before, I mean, I feel like it can be done even when you don't have a really experienced performer. You just spend a little bit of time directing them. And so I just don't have much tolerance for adults doing the voices of children. It takes me out of the experience and makes it seem kind of light and fluffy. And I don't think they were going for that in the tone. They're going for a pretty serious tone. But let me talk about the visuals a little bit, because I do think there's something that for me worked against the tone, and that was the choice to have black outlines around all the characters, thick black outlines. Now, in animation, there is very often very thin, almost unnoticeable black outlines surrounding characters, sometimes not as well. But that choice of really thick black outlines, I don't know if they were going for like an old-timey comic book feel or an old-timey cartoon feel. It felt old-timey to me, but in a Saturday morning kind of way, which really seemed to work against the otherwise serious and weighty tone that they were going for in much of the story. So I think a number of other viewers are not going to feel the same as me. I just have that connotation for that choice in art style. Also, there are one or two instances of overdone anime facial behavior, I would call it. Very rare, but they were still in there. I was like, oh, I'm not a fan of that either. But otherwise, solid stuff. What I have come to expect from these DC animated movies, not setting any new high bars, but really giving us solid animated movie animation. So, largely speaking, I don't have many complaints. Now, as far as themes go, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? I don't think it's very likely to trigger that. They almost seem to be going for a selflessness theme in one or two beats, as Clark wants to help, even though there's a great danger of him being misunderstood and feared by people. He doesn't want to be misunderstood. Despite that, he does want to use his abilities to help the people on this planet that he's come to call home. But Martian Manhunter, as also the last of his kind, asserts that self-preservation should be their highest priority. And so we see the selfishness and selflessness kind of rubbing up against each other in at least one scene. But the payoff for this moment, if it's intended to be that, doesn't feel as focused or intentional as it could to me, and also comes in a moment, in that same moment, that felt forced to me in general, in the pre-climax. Superman throughout the movie does put himself in harm's way, so he is self-sacrificing, but there isn't a singular dramatic moment that strongly illustrated that to me, either thematically or dramatically in a satisfying way. So I doubt that many people are going to find that theme very noticeable, and I don't know that any other themes that they intended would be jumping out at me any more than that. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, skip this one. It's novel for its emphasis on the sci-fi aspect, but not novel enough to really stand out from the various origin stories you've seen of Superman in live action, animation, or the comics. In fact, you've got a number of comic book takes on Superman's origins. Well, maybe not a number, but you've got at least one that you would rather sit down and just reread that in the time that it took you to watch this movie. It's not a bad experience, it's just not worth your time and money given all your other entertainment options. This one is rated PG-13. I couldn't find a description for exactly why, but I would say that it's probably for violence, language, and some mild nudity. There's a scene where we end up seeing Superman's backside. It seems like it makes sense given the circumstances, and it's pretty brief. But so it's not sexualized per se, but anyway, that's, I think, probably what's going on in the rating there. Those are my thoughts. I would love to get yours in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected, to share this content with others. Anything you want to do in that regard, I'd be really grateful for. And then I hope you will join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. It is time for Extra Life again, and I'd love for you to be a part of it with me. Here's a recycled but slightly modified promo to tell you more. Once again this year, Christian Geek Central is participating in Extra Life. This is a charity that raises funds for the Children's Miracle Network of Hospitals, which provides free medical care to children whose families could otherwise not afford it. And this is very often for critical, life-saving treatment. Joining our team only requires a willingness to ask your family and friends to consider donating toward your fundraising efforts. Participants also usually do something fun and game-related to draw attention to their fundraising efforts, like a special game night at your home or your church, or like me, you could do a crazy 24-hour video gaming marathon. Now, I'm theming it around video games, but really this event can be themed around any kind of gaming, which includes both video games and tabletop games of any kind. What you do to raise funds is entirely up to you, but I would love for you to consider joining the Christian Geek Central Extra Life team. As team leader, I'll be there to help answer your questions, provide some helpful tips if I can, and just in general be your fundraising cheerleader and try to draw attention myself to your fundraising efforts. You can get more information about the event as a whole at extra-life.org, and if you choose to sign up there, be sure to select Christian Geek Central as your team so I can get in touch with you and then just help in whatever way I can. Fundraising can begin at any time, but our main push is going to be through the month of October leading up to November 7th. That's the annual Extra Life Game Day, when I'll be streaming my 24-hour video gaming marathon live and trying to stay awake without throwing up. More details on my live stream as we get closer to it. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.